I am so glad to be with all of you this evening. Teen mental health is absolutely one of my biggest passions. We had a mental health epidemic going on prior to the start of COVID-19. As you heard, we are getting such spikes now in anxiety and depression in our youth. I series for 2 decades on the need to switch our paradigm from one of crisis management to prevention. I'm going to start with my personal story so you can understand why I've devoted my entire career and research to developing and testing cognitive behavior therapy-based interventions to help children, teens, and young adults suffering from depression, stress, and anxiety. On the slide shows you where I grew up. It was a town in Southwestern Pennsylvania near the West Virginia border. I was born with rose-colored glasses on. And that resiliency really came in handy when I was 15 years of age, home alone with my mom when she sneezed, stroked out, and died right in front of me. Now, those of you who are parents can imagine how traumatic that would be for your child. I suffered from terrible post-traumatic stress disorder. For months, I was a ball of anxiety. I suffered from depression. There was no help for me in my little town of Southwestern Pennsylvania. After about 4 months of not eating, not sleeping, not functioning well in school, I had a family member take me to my family physician, and she said, please do something to help Burn. That physician did what so many providers still do today. First line, got out a prescription pad, wrote a script for Valium, said, give Burn one of these every night. She'll sleep and be just fine. There was no counseling for me. There was no evidence-based cognitive behavior therapy. And I'll never forget waking up the next morning. I did sleep for the first time in months, but I was groggy. And I said, I don't want to feel like this anymore. I just got to gut it up and cope. But within the next 4 years, not only did I lose my mom, suddenly I lost a cousin after a motor vehicle accident who was like my brother. The year after that, I lost the only grandparent I ever knew and loved. And at age 19, my dad had his heart attack. That's a lot of grief for a teenager. But you know the story. What doesn't break us only makes us stronger. And as a result of what I went through, no help, which, by the way, so many don't receive help when they are suffering with depression and anxiety. But what I went through gave me a passion to become a nurse, then a pediatric nurse practitioner, then a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, and go on to get my PhD so I could develop evidence-based interventions to help all these children and teens who are suffering from mental health problems. 1 out of 4 to 5 teens have been suffering from a mental health problem. That was before the pandemic. It has spiked to almost 2/3 of teens suffering from depression and anxiety right now. Yet less than 50% get any treatment. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in 10 to 34-year-olds. We all know there are certain risk factors that put our teens at risk to develop mental health problems. But we also know resiliency is a protective factor against these mental health disorders. A lot of people misperceive resiliency. They think you either have to be born with it or you will never acquire it. That couldn't be further from the truth. We can build resiliency skills, protective factors in our children and teens. But let's not wait until they're in crisis to do it. We would never send a construction worker into a work site without a hard hat. How can we send our children, our teens throughout life without building the evidence-based CBT, coping skills, mindfulness skills that they need to cope with life stressors? So the common feature of depressive disorders is the presence of a sad, empty, or irritable mood, which is associated with somatic symptoms, cognitive changes. But the red flag here for diagnosis, it's symptoms that interfere with functioning at home, in school, or with peers. Prior to the pandemic, depression affects 10 to 20% of adolescents, but the detection rate is still very low. Less than 20% of cases of adolescent depression are actually found, and less than half are treated. If we don't pick up depression early, the reoccurrence rate is 60 to 70%. And we all know teens will attempt to self-regulate these symptoms of depression and anxiety with often alcohol or drugs. Anymore, as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, it is a rarity to treat just one mental health disorder in a child or teen. We are seeing so many comorbid mental health disorders. Now, the good news, if there is good news to mental health disorders, is that evidence-based treatment is similar for both anxiety and depression, because those two disorders often co-occur together. Well, a lot of adolescents look like adults who get depressed. They get sad. They withdraw. They don't want to engage in their usual activities. However, it is critical to note that many adolescents who are depressed or anxious often exhibit irritability and anger, and that results in behavior issues. Now, often, who gets the most attention in school? It's teens and children who are displaying, externalizing, acting out behaviors. Oftentimes, people don't think about anxiety and depression underlying acting out behaviors and anger. And that's super important. Hopelessness is the number one predictor of suicide in adolescents and young adults. Now, the reason I'm bringing up causes of depression is super important. A majority of the cases of depression and anxiety are due to negative patterns of thinking. If that's the cause of the depression or the anxiety, we can treat with the SSRIs all we want. Maybe a teen will feel a little bit better for a while if they adhere to the medication. Most teens don't adhere to the medication. So unless we get to the root of the problem in many of these teens, which is a negative pattern of thinking, and help them to turn those negative thoughts around to positive, like we do in cognitive behavior therapy, that depression is going to continue to reoccur. Anxiety is the most prevalent disorder in youth under 16 years of age. It's a very complex pattern of reactions to a perceived threat that affects our teens' cognitive, behavioral, and physiological, as well as subjective domains. And I really want to point out, so many children and teens go through unnecessary, intrusive procedures when they visit a primary care provider with somatic disorders without that person ever questioning, could this be anxiety or depression? So when a teen or child presents with headaches, recurrent belly pain, I always put depression and anxiety in my differential diagnoses. That's critical. We all know teens have common fears, new experiences, social, school, performance issues. They're very sensitive to the way they look and the way that others perceive them. They fear death. They know it's real. They know it's permanent at this age. And they also fear losing possessions and being violated. But when do fears and worries become symptoms and disorders? Well, anxiety disorders involve intense and persistent fear and worry. It's extreme for their developmental stage. And this is the key red flag. It interferes with their daily functioning, their ability to concentrate, to make judgment. There are a lot of comorbid conditions that often come along with anxiety disorders, major depressive disorders, bipolar disorder, attention deficit, and oppositional defiant disorder. But just like depression, teens that are suffering quietly with anxiety and depression are at much greater risk for substance and alcohol use disorders. We know from so many research studies, the best first line evidence-based treatment for mild to moderate anxiety and depression is cognitive behavior therapy. But so few children, teens, even adults get it because we have a massive shortage of mental health providers across the United States. Also, a lot of parents don't realize CBT is gold standard evidence-based treatment for these conditions, so they don't know to ask for a therapist who's going to do pure dose cognitive behavior therapy. So as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and pediatric nurse practitioner, I had seen throughout the years so many children and teens not get CBT treatment for depression and anxiety. So I said to myself, why don't I manualize cognitive behavior therapy so that it could be delivered by nurses, social workers, even teachers in our classrooms as a preventive strategy to help our children and teens cope with stress, anxiety, and depression. So 20-some years ago, I manualized cognitive behavior therapy. I have tested this program through 17 studies, but the National Institutes of Health funded me to conduct a large randomized controlled trial with teens in 11 schools. Half of them received my COPE program. The other received an attention control program. The teachers, after I did a workshop with them, actually delivered COPE in their health classrooms. CBT is based on the thinking, feeling, behaving triangle. In this program, as in CBT, we teach the teens and the children how they think directly relates to how they feel and how they behave. We teach them the ABCs, how to monitor for activating events that occur that cause them to feel stress, that cause them to have a negative thought, how to stop the negative thought, turn it around so they'll feel better and engage in healthier behaviors. This program has all the key elements of CBT in this structured curriculum. So there's positive ways for the teens to deal with stress. There's the 4-step problem-solving process, because most teens, most adults who are young don't know this 4-step process. This can help so much to alleviate anxiety if they know how to approach their problems. There's a big section in this program on how to regulate their emotions when they start feeling stressed, anxious, or depressed. Gratitude, which we know is a resiliency skill, is built in. Guided imagery, mindfulness, deep breathing, positive self-talk to try to change negative patterns of thinking to positive. Skills building follows each of these sessions because you've got to put it into practice after you learn the content. It's like behavior change. It takes 30 to 60 days to change behavior. It also takes 30 to 60 days to change thinking. For those teens with anxiety, they're worriers. They worry about everything. This is mindfulness-based too. So the teens also learn how to become more mindful. So the findings from this trial were published in different places, but what we found, less depression, less alcohol use, less anxiety, healthier behaviors, higher academic performance. When we teach children and teens these skills, they engage better. They perform better. The teens, they love this program. We have hundreds of pages of positive feedback from these teenagers saying how much this program has helped them control their anger, their anxiety, get a handle on depression, feel better about themselves. NIH has highlighted this program for its dissemination capability. Well, after I created the 15-session program that also has nutrition and physical activity in it, I just pulled out the 7 CBT sessions and I started testing them with children, teens, and young adults who already were diagnosed with depression and anxiety. Through 17 studies, we get the same outcomes. When children go through these 7 sessions, their depression drops, anxiety drops, stress drops, and healthy behaviors climb. Healthy behaviors, we can't expect them unless we deal with the mental health piece first. And as a researcher whose ultimate goal is to improve the lives of children, teens, and young adults, I'm so excited to share this program's being used in 49 states now, in 5 countries. It's being reimbursed when it's delivered in primary care. It's being delivered in schools by teachers to build this protective resiliency with children and teens. This is drawings as part of the program from a middle schooler who went through it. Again, the kids really get thinking, feeling, behaving. They really start to connect that. And they also learn, again, mindfulness and imagery skills. So to conclude, we need a paradigm shift from crisis management. We will always need mental health counselors. In November, I spoke to 160 university presidents who were going crazy because they kept saying, We're increasing numbers of mental health counselors, but our mental health issues keep getting worse. What's the problem? And I said, we've got to teach our kids these skills from the inception, walking into our doors. We have to teach this like all other subjects. There is hope. Evidence-based interventions exist.